The fluorescent lights hummed their indifferent song as Marcus lay on the emergency room floor, his breathing shallow, erratic. Blood seeped through his shirt, dark, spreading. But the nurses at the desk hadn't looked up in 47 minutes. He'd counted. Every second. The automatic doors swooshed open and closed, admitting others who were ushered past him, their paperwork processed with efficiency he couldn't comprehend. His vision blurred at the edges, the sterile white tiles beneath him turning crimson. And still, no one came. A doctor walked by, shoes squeaking against linoleum, eyes forward, jaw set. Marcus tried to speak, but his voice emerged as nothing more than a whisper that dissolved into the antiseptic air. What invisible wall separated him from the care happening all around him? What silent decision had been made the moment he walked through those doors? If you've ever wondered how the promise of equal treatment crumbles in the face of invisible barriers, if you want to witness a system's true nature when no one thinks they're being watched, subscribe now, because what happened in the next 6 hours will make you question everything you thought. You knew about the oath to do no harm. The knife had found Marcus between his ribs. A parking lot argument turned deadly over nothing. Over $20. Over pride that cost more than money ever could. He'd driven himself to Metropolitan General, one hand pressed against the wound, the other gripping the steering wheel with strength, borrowed from pure survival instinct. The emergency room doors slid open with a mechanical whisper, and he stumbled inside, his insurance card already in his trembling hand like a passport to salvation. The intake nurse, her badge read Sandra, looked up from her computer screen. Their eyes met for exactly 2 seconds before hers dropped back down, her fingers hovering over the keyboard in a pause that stretched too long. Marcus leaned against the counter, feeling warmth spread across his abdomen, the coppery taste of fear coating his tongue. "I've been stabbed," he said, though surely the blood soaking through his jacket made that obvious. "I need help." Sandra's fingers resumed typing, but slower now, deliberate. "Take a seat. We'll call you." "I'm bleeding pretty bad." "We'll call you." Her voice carried the flat finality of a judge's gavel. Marcus turned toward the waiting room, his reflection catching in the glass partition. A black man, 32 years old, wearing a grocery store employee uniform with Marcus embroidered above the pocket. He saw what Sandra saw. He understood, in that terrible moment of clarity that precedes shock, exactly what was happening. The plastic chairs were arranged in neat rows, half filled with people who radiated various levels of distress. He chose a seat near the front, close to the double doors that led to treatment, as if proximity might matter, as if geography could overcome whatever invisible calculus had already been calculated. 10 minutes passed. A white woman entered, holding her daughter's hand. The child had a swollen wrist, a playground injury, from the conversation Marcus overheard. They were called back within 6 minutes, 15 minutes. A middle-aged man in a business suit, complaining of chest pain. Called back immediately. Wheelchair produced, urgency performed with theatrical efficiency. 20 minutes. Marcus's shirt was now soaked through completely. He'd wadded up his jacket and pressed it against the wound, but the bleeding wouldn't stop. His vision wavered at the edges, like reality was losing resolution. He approached the desk again. Sandra's eyes flicked toward him, then away, as if he were furniture that had inconveniently learned to move. "Please," Marcus said, hating the weakness in his voice. "I'm losing a lot of blood." "Sir, we're very busy tonight. Someone will call you when there's an available room." But the waiting room had emptied by half. Rooms existed. Space existed. The building itself seemed to breathe with capacity, with possibility. Just not for him. Marcus returned to his chair, each step requiring negotiation with a body that was beginning to shut down non-essential systems. His hands had gone cold. His thoughts arrived in fragments, disconnected sentences that didn't quite form paragraphs anymore. A young couple entered, both college-aged, the boy holding his arm at an awkward angle. Skateboarding accident, Marcus's detached consciousness noted. They were called back within 8 minutes. The boy's laughter echoed from behind the double doors. Whatever they'd given him for pain was working beautifully. 35 minutes. Marcus counted the ceiling tiles because focusing on something, anything, kept him tethered to consciousness. 42 tiles in a 6x7 grid. Several stained with old water damage that maintenance had never bothered to repair. A janitor emerged from the treatment area, pushing a large trash bin, his movements methodical and unhurried. He was an older black man, maybe 60, with gray threading through his hair and eyes that had seen too much. His name tag read Willie. As he worked his way across the waiting room, emptying smaller bins into his larger receptacle, his gaze landed on Marcus. Their eyes locked. Willie's hands stilled on the trash bin. Something passed between them, recognition, perhaps, or the wordless transmission of shared understanding that exists between people who navigate the same invisible barriers. Willie's mouth tightened into a thin line. He glanced toward the intake desk where Sandra sat, then back to Marcus, his expression cycling through emotions too quickly to name: anger, sorrow, resignation, and finally, decision. 47 minutes. Marcus lay down across 3 chairs, too weak now to maintain the performance of uprightness. The fluorescent lights overhead hummed their indifferent frequency, and somewhere a television murmured news about healthcare reform, about equality, about progress. The blood pooling beneath him told a different story, wrote a different headline in spreading crimson. A doctor emerged from the double doors. Tall, white, stethoscope draped around his neck like a symbol of authority. He walked past Marcus, shoes squeaking against the tile, eyes forward, jaw set in an expression Marcus couldn't read. Purpose, maybe. Or practiced blindness, doctor, Marcus tried to say, but his voice had abandoned him, leaving only a whisper that dissolved into antiseptic air. The doctor didn't pause, didn't turn, didn't acknowledge the man bleeding out 10 feet away. He approached the intake desk, spoke briefly with Sandra, then disappeared down a corridor marked Staff Only. Willie had stopped pretending to work. He stood motionless, his hands gripping the trash bin's edge, knuckles pale against dark skin. He was staring at Marcus with an intensity that felt like pressure, like weight, like a question being asked without words. Then Willie moved, not toward Marcus, but toward the intake desk, his stride purposeful, his shoulders squared. Sandra looked up as he approached, her expression shifting from indifference to irritation. "Willie, I'm busy. That man is dying." Willie's voice was quiet, but it carried. Several people in the waiting room looked up. Sandra's face hardened. "We have protocols. He'll be called when what? When he's already dead?" Willie leaned closer, his voice dropping to a register that made the air itself feel tense. "How many more, Sandra? How many more before you remember you used to be human?" Sandra's hand moved toward her phone. "You need to get back to work, or I'll call security." Willie straightened, his expression unreadable now, carefully blank. But Marcus saw his hand slide into his pocket, saw him pull out a cell phone, saw him step away from the desk with the deliberate movements of a man who had just crossed a bridge and set it on fire behind him. Who was Willie calling? And why did the act feel less like hope and more like the moment before an explosion? The call lasted 38 seconds. Willie spoke in urgent, clipped sentences, his back turned to the intake desk, his voice low enough that Marcus couldn't hear the words, only their rhythm, their terrible intensity. When he ended the call, Willie's hand trembled as he returned the phone to his pocket. Then he did something that made Sandra rise from her chair in alarm. He walked directly to Marcus, knelt beside him, and placed his hand on Marcus's shoulder, with the gentleness of someone touching sacred ground. "Stay with me," Willie said. "Help is coming, real help. Just stay with me. Marcus's vision had narrowed to a tunnel. Willie's face filled that tunnel, and behind him, beyond him, Marcus could see Sandra speaking rapidly into her phone, her expression cycling between anger and fear. Security would come. They always came when the invisible tried to become visible, when the designed order faced disruption. "I've seen this before," Willie said, his voice breaking. "Too many times? I've seen you before." He hadn't, of course. They'd never met. But Marcus understood. Willie had seen the situation before, had witnessed this particular choreography of negligence, this performance of selective blindness. "My daughter," Willie continued, his eyes glistening. "Vanessa, 5 years ago, almost to the day, she came in with chest pain, 23 years old, bright as sunrise, studying to be a teacher. They made her wait. Said it was anxiety, said young people don't have heart attacks, said a lot of things that sounded like medicine but smelled like judgment." Marcus's hand found Willie's arm, squeezed weakly. The story didn't need an ending. The fact that Willie worked here, that he'd stayed, that he pushed a janitor's cart through halls that had killed his daughter, that told the ending clearly enough. "She waited 4 hours," Willie said. "By the time they took her back, the damage was done. Massive coronary. She died on a table in a room that had been empty the whole time she sat in that chair." He pointed to the exact seat where Marcus had first sat. "That chair right there." The double doors burst open. 2 security guards emerged, their faces set in expressions of professional neutrality. Behind them, a hospital administrator, a white woman in her 50s with perfectly styled gray hair, and a name tag that read, "Patricia Chen, VP Patient Services." "Willie," Patricia said, her voice carrying the dangerous calm of someone used to being obeyed. "Step away from the patient." "He's not a patient," Willie replied, not moving. "That's the problem. You've made him invisible. We have protocols. We assess based on what?" Willie stood now, his full height imposing despite his age. "His address? His name? The color of his skin? Show me the protocol, Patricia. Show me where it says some people bleed slower than others." The waiting room had gone completely silent. Every eye was now fixed on the scene unfolding, every ear attuned to words that were usually spoken only in whispers, in private, in the safety of like-minded company. Patricia's jaw tightened. "This man is being disruptive. Remove him." The security guards moved forward, but Willie held up his hand. "I'll walk out myself. But first, you should know, I called someone. A journalist, my sister. She's been investigating this hospital for 3 years, and she's about to walk through those doors with a camera crew and a list of names. 47 names, Patricia. 47 people who waited too long, who somehow never qualified as emergencies, who all shared certain—" He paused, let the word hang, "demographics." Patricia's face went pale. "You're making serious accusations. I'm stating documented facts. Every night for 5 years, I've written down names, times, outcomes. I've kept my own record, because the hospital's records have a funny way of getting revised after incidents. Vanessa's file says she arrived with mild discomfort. Mild. My daughter was clutching her chest, crying, begging for help, and the report says mild discomfort." The automatic doors swooshed open. A woman entered, late 40s, black, carrying a professional camera bag and radiating the focused intensity of a predator who'd finally cornered her prey. Behind her, 2 people with video equipment, and behind them, someone in a suit who looked very much like a lawyer. "Ruth," Willie said, and his voice carried relief and resignation in equal measure. Ruth's eyes swept the waiting room, cataloging everything with the trained precision of an investigative journalist who'd learned to see what others overlooked. Her gaze landed on Marcus, still bleeding on the floor, and something fierce and righteous ignited in her expression. "Start recording," she said to her crew. "Everything! Every face, every word, every second of this. Patricia moved to intercept her. "You can't film in here without—" "Without what?" "Permission. I have a man actively bleeding out in your waiting room. I have my brother's testimony as a 5-year employee, and I have documented evidence of a pattern of discriminatory care practices. The question isn't whether I can film. The question is whether you want to explain to federal investigators why you tried to stop me." The cameras were already rolling. Ruth moved toward Marcus, kneeling beside him with a microphone in hand. "Sir, can you hear me? Can you tell me your name and what happened?" Marcus's lips moved, but sound wouldn't come. His body had moved beyond words into some primitive territory where existence required every available resource. Ruth turned to Patricia. "How long has this man been waiting?" Patricia's mouth opened, closed. Her eyes darted to Sandra, who was frantically typing on her computer, presumably pulling up logs, timestamps, evidence that would need to align with whatever story was about to be constructed. We have protocols for triage." "How long?" Ruth's voice could have cut steel. A nurse appeared from the double doors. "Moving quickly now, urgency suddenly discovered." She pushed a wheelchair, accompanied by another nurse and a doctor Marcus hadn't seen before. Younger, Latina, her face reflecting genuine shock as she took in the scene. "Oh my God," the doctor, her badge read, "Dr. Rivera," breathed. "How long has he been out here?" 53 minutes, Willie said, his voice carrying across the waiting room like an indictment. Dr. Rivera's face transformed, cycling through disbelief to fury in seconds. She rounded on Patricia. "Who was working triage? Who assessed this patient?" "I did." Sandra's voice emerged small, defensive. "He said he was stabbed, but he was ambulatory and he didn't seem what?" Dr. Rivera's voice rose. "Didn't seem like he was bleeding through his shirt? Didn't seem like he qualified as an emergency? What exactly did he need to do to get treated? Die right here on your floor?" They were moving Marcus onto the wheelchair now, hands finally touching him with medical purpose, gloved fingers finally assessing the damage that had been visible from the moment he walked through the doors. His blood stained the white tile, forming a shape that looked almost intentional, almost artistic, evidence rendered in crimson. "Get him to Trauma 1, Dr. Rivera ordered. Type and cross-match CBC, get surgical on standby. Move!" The wheelchair rushed through the double doors, but Ruth's cameras followed, documenting everything. The suddenly discovered urgency, the panic that appeared only when visibility became unavoidable, the transformation from invisible to emergency in the span of a news crew's arrival. Patricia grabbed Ruth's arm. "You need to leave." "Patient privacy," Ruth shook off her hand. "Don't talk to me about patient privacy when you've violated every other principle of patient care. My broadcast goes live in 20 minutes. You can spend that time calling your lawyers, or you can spend it saving that man's life. But either way, the world is about to see exactly what happens inside these walls when people think no one's watching." Willie stood alone now, his janitor's cart abandoned, his phone still in his hand. He'd made his choice, crossed his line, detonated his bomb. Whatever came next, for Marcus, for him, for this hospital, couldn't be undone. Patricia's phone was ringing, then Sandra's, then the phone at the intake desk. The pressure was building, the walls of careful invisibility cracking under the weight of sudden, inescapable witness. In Trauma 1, Dr. Rivera cut away Marcus's blood-soaked shirt, exposing the wound that had been obvious from the beginning. "How is this possible?" she said to her team, though the question was rhetorical, existential. "How did someone with a penetrating chest wound sit in our waiting room for almost an hour?" A nurse, younger, white, horrified, said what everyone was thinking, but no one wanted to voice. "Because the system worked exactly as it was designed to." The monitors connected to Marcus began screaming their urgent song. His blood pressure was crashing, his heart fighting a losing battle against hypovolemic shock. Dr. Rivera's hands moved with practiced efficiency, but her face reflected the desperate arithmetic of lost time. 53 minutes that couldn't be reclaimed. Damage that might have been prevented. A life that hung in balance because someone had decided, consciously or unconsciously, that his emergency wasn't really an emergency at all. Outside, Ruth's cameras captured everything. Willie's testimony, Patricia's stonewalling, the sudden transformation of the emergency room into a stage where invisibility died and accountability waited to be born. But in Trauma 1, Marcus's heart made a decision that transcended policy, protocol, or publicity. The monitor's steady beep became a single, sustained tone. Flatline. The sound of a human heart stopping is supposed to be dramatic. A crescendo. A final punctuation mark on existence. But in reality, it's just a tone. Steady, electronic, indifferent. The flatline doesn't care about justice or injustice, about systems or protests, about cameras recording in the hallway. It simply announces absence where presence used to be. Dr. Rivera's voice cut through the noise. Start compressions. Charge to 200. The trauma team moved with choreographed precision, hands on Marcus's chest, pumping with mechanical rhythm, while another nurse prepared the defibrillator paddles. This urgency, this focused intensity, had existed all along. It had simply been withheld, stored behind doors that opened for some and remained closed for others. Clear. The shock jolted Marcus's body, his back arching off the table. The monitor remained flatlined. Again. 360 this time. Outside in the hallway, Ruth's camera captured the chaos. Staff running, equipment being rushed from other rooms, the sudden mobilization of resources that had somehow been unavailable when Marcus bled quietly in the waiting room. Willie stood against the wall, his face carved from stone, watching the performance of rescue that came 53 minutes too late. Patricia appeared beside him, her voice low, urgent. "Willie, you need to understand. This isn't what it looks like. We have triage protocols based on acuity scores, resource allocation, medical necessity." "Stop." Willie's voice was quiet, but it stopped Patricia mid-sentence. "Stop with the words that sound like medicine but mean something else entirely. I've worked here for 32 years, Patricia. I've cleaned these floors, emptied these trash cans, made myself invisible so I could see what people do when they think no one's watching. You want to know what I've learned?" He reached into his janitor's cart, pulled out a worn notebook, the kind students use, with a marbled cover and pages that had been filled with careful handwriting. "I started keeping this 5 years ago after Vanessa died. Every shift I write down what I see. Names, times, presenting complaints, demographics, outcomes. 47 people, Patricia. 47 cases where the waiting was too long, where the urgency was somehow never urgent enough, where people who looked like me and Marcus got triaged right into graves." Patricia's face had gone from pale to ashen. You can't, those are confidential patient records. These are observations from public spaces. Waiting rooms, hallways. I never accessed files, never broke into computers. I just watched. I paid attention to the patterns everyone else pretended not to see. Willie opened the notebook, his finger tracing down a page. Harold Freeman, 62, chest pain. Waited 3 hours and 17 minutes. Heart attack in the waiting room. Died before they got him to treatment. I mopped up the blood where he fell. He turned a page. Michelle Washington, 38, abdominal pain. Waited 2 hours and 43 minutes. Ruptured appendix. Sepsis. She survived, barely, but lost part of her intestine because by the time they took her seriously, the infection had spread. Another page. Carlos Rodriguez, 29, stab wound to the abdomen. Waited 1 hour and 52 minutes. He lived. But tell me, Patricia, How many white men in business suits have you ever seen wait that long with a stab wound? Clear, Dr. Rivera's voice carried from the trauma room. Another shock. The monitor remained flatlined. Ruth moved closer, her camera capturing Willie's notebook, the handwritten testimony of years spent bearing witness. Willie, why didn't you come forward before? Why wait 5 years? Willie's eyes filled with tears he refused to let fall. Because I was afraid. Because I needed this job. Because speaking truth costs everything, and I wasn't ready to pay the price. He looked directly into the camera. But watching another man die the same way my daughter died, that costs more. Some prices you pay up front. Some you pay forever. I chose wrong before. Not this time. Inside Trauma 1, Dr. Rivera's hands trembled as she administered another round of epinephrine directly into Marcus's heart. The compressions continued, 30 compressions, 2 breaths, a rhythm older than hospitals, older than protocols, as ancient as the human impulse to fight death with everything available. Come on, Dr. Rivera whispered. Come on, don't let them win. Don't let this be how your story ends. The monitor blipped. Once. Then again. Then settled into an irregular but present rhythm. We've got a pulse. The relief in the room was palpable. Oxygen itself seeming to return. Weak, thready, but it's there. Get him to OR now. Page thoracic surgery. I want the best we have. And I want them now. Dr. Rivera stripped off her gloves, her face flushed with the intensity of the fight. She stepped into the hallway where Ruth's camera waited. That man nearly died because someone decided his emergency wasn't an emergency. As a physician, as a human being, I'm telling you, what happened here tonight is unconscionable. Patricia stepped forward, her PR training finally kicking in. Dr. Rivera, I understand emotions are high, but these are complex issues involving resource management, triage protocols that have been developed over decades. Don't, Dr. Rivera's voice was ice. Don't insult my intelligence or my medical degree by pretending this was about protocols. I've worked emergency medicine for 15 years. I can triage a critical patient in 30 seconds. That man had a penetrating chest wound, visible bleeding, signs of shock. He should have been in my trauma bay within 5 minutes of arrival. Not 53 minutes later, because a camera crew showed up. Ruth turned to Patricia. Ms. Chen, my research shows this hospital receives higher reimbursement rates for certain demographics. Is it possible that financial incentives have created a system where some patients are prioritized over others? That's a gross oversimplification. Then simplify it for me. Ruth's voice was steel wrapped in silk. Explain in simple terms why a man with a stab wound waited almost an hour, while people with minor injuries were treated immediately. Give me a reason that doesn't involve the fact that those people had different insurance, different addresses, different skin colors. The hallway had filled with staff, nurses, doctors, technicians, people who'd worked at Metropolitan General for years, who'd seen the patterns, who'd stayed silent because silence was easier than confrontation, because speaking meant becoming a target, because the system punished witnesses more reliably than it punished perpetrators. One nurse, an older woman named Doris, stepped forward. I'll tell you what happened. Marcus came in with his insurance card ready. He has coverage through his employer. Good coverage, actually. But Sandra saw his address, Jefferson Heights, and made assumptions. We all know the code. Jefferson Heights means Medicaid, means uninsured, means complicated reimbursement, means we can wait. Except he had insurance. She never even verified it. She just saw his face, his address, and decided he wasn't a priority. Sandra, still at the intake desk, spoke for the first time since the camera crew arrived. That's not, I followed the triage protocol. Show me the protocol. Ruth's cameraman moved closer to Sandra. Show me where in your official triage protocol it says to assess patients based on their home address. Sandra's hands shook as she pulled up documents on her computer, scrolling frantically. The silence stretched, became damning. "There is no protocol," Willie said quietly. "That's the whole point. The discrimination isn't written down. It's understood. It's transmitted through culture, through unspoken expectations, through 1,000 small moments where someone decides that certain lives require less urgency than others. You can't find it in a manual because it's written in something deeper, in the assumptions we make about who deserves immediate care and who can wait." Ruth's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, and her expression shifted to something fierce and satisfied. "My producer just told me we're trending nationally. Yarden Healthcare Apartheid is the #1 trend on Twitter. People are posting their own stories, thousands of them. You didn't just fail Marcus tonight, Patricia. You exposed a system that's been failing people like him for decades. The only difference is, this time, someone was watching." In the operating room, Marcus lay unconscious under bright lights, his chest open as surgeons worked to repair the damage. Not just from the knife, but from the 53 minutes of bleeding that should never have happened. His heart, restarted through desperate intervention, beat with fragile determination against odds that had been stacked against him from the moment he walked through the emergency room doors. The lead surgeon, Dr. Clifford Hayes, white, 63, with 30 years of experience, spoke to his team as he worked. This repair would have been straightforward if we'd gotten him immediately. "Now we're dealing with significant blood loss, tissue damage from prolonged hypoxia, potential organ failure. He might survive, but he'll carry the consequences of that weight for the rest of his life." Back in the hallway, security had arrived in greater numbers, not to escort Willie out, but to control the growing crowd. Staff members, some crying, were approaching Ruth with their own stories. An Asian nurse named Linda described how her recommendations for immediate treatment were routinely overridden when the patient was Black or Hispanic. A young doctor named Raymond admitted he'd witnessed the pattern but convinced himself it was coincidence, that he was seeing bias where only medical judgment existed, until the accumulation of coincidences became impossible to deny. Patricia's phone rang. The hospital CEO, certainly, or perhaps the board of directors, or maybe the legal team that would spend the coming months trying to contain damage that had already metastasized beyond containment. She answered, stepped away, her voice rising in defensive explanation that no one nearby wanted to hear. Willie sat down on a bench, his notebook open on his lap, 47 names staring up at him. 47 stories of waiting, of being invisible, of systems functioning exactly as designed. Ruth sat beside him, her hand covering his. "You did the right thing," she said softly. "Vanessa would have been 28 next month," Willie replied. "She wanted to teach elementary school. She used to say that kids deserve adults who see them, really see them, who make them feel like they matter." His voice cracked. "How do I tell her I spent 5 years watching other people's children, other people's parents, siblings, friends, go through what she went through? How do I explain that I kept silent for 5 years? You're not silent now, and because you finally spoke, Marcus might live, others might live. The system might actually change." Willie closed the notebook. "Or the system might just learn to hide better. Put the right words in the protocols. Train staff to say the correct things when cameras are present. Make the discrimination more sophisticated, harder to prove, impossible to document, with a janitor's handwritten notes." Ruth had no answer for that, because Willie was right. Systems designed to discriminate rarely died when exposed. They evolved, adapted, found new ways to achieve old outcomes while maintaining plausible deniability. But something had shifted tonight. Some barrier between invisible and visible had shattered. Whether that shift would mean justice or just better camouflage remained to be seen. In the OR, Marcus's heart continued its fragile beating. Each pulse was a small rebellion against a system that had decided his life could wait. The surgery lasted 6 hours. Dawn broke over Metropolitan General in shades of gray and gold, indifferent to the human drama playing out beneath its light. Ruth's broadcast had gone viral. 20 million views in the first 12 hours, picked up by every major news network, dissected by politicians, medical ethicists, and thousands of people who'd experienced their own versions of invisible care. Marcus survived the surgery, but Dr. Hayes's prognosis was guarded. He's in critical condition. The next 48 hours will tell us if there's permanent organ damage. His liver took significant impact, and the prolonged hypoxia means we're watching for brain injury, kidney failure, a cascade of complications that might have been prevented with immediate intervention. Willie hadn't left the hospital. He sat in a waiting area, his janitor's uniform still on, his cart abandoned somewhere in the chaos. Ruth had stayed too, though her camera crew had departed to edit footage, prepare follow-up stories, contact federal investigators, and medical licensing boards. When Dr. Rivera emerged from the OR, still in her surgical cap, she found them both. He made it through surgery. That's something, but he's not out of the woods. Can we see him? Willie asked. ICU, family only. Are you family? Willie started to shake his head, but Ruth interrupted. He doesn't have family here. They're in another state. But Willie saved his life by calling me. If that doesn't make him family, I don't know what does. Dr. Rivera studied Willie's face, seeing perhaps the grief, the years of accumulated sorrow, the weight of bearing witness. 10 minutes, he's unconscious, intubated. But maybe he'll know you're there. The ICU was a forest of machines, monitors beeping, ventilators breathing for patients who couldn't breathe alone, IV poles standing like mechanical trees dripping life-sustaining fluids. Marcus occupied a corner bay, his face obscured by tape and tubes, his chest rising and falling with mechanical precision. Willie approached the bedside, his hand hovering over Marcus's as if afraid to touch, afraid to transfer the weight of all he carried. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm sorry I waited so long. I'm sorry that fear kept me silent while others suffered. I'm sorry that your pain was the price of my finally finding courage." Marcus, unconscious, made no response, but the monitor showed his heart beating, irregular, stressed, but persistent. A survivor's rhythm. Ruth photographed Willie's notebook, page by page, each entry a small gravestone, marking a failure of care. These names would become exhibits in lawsuits, subjects of federal investigations, data points in studies about healthcare disparities. But they'd been human first, people with families, with dreams, with lives that had been treated as less urgent than others for reasons that had nothing to do with medicine. By noon, protesters had gathered outside Metropolitan General. Some were family members of Willie's 47 documented cases. Others were activists, organizers, community members who'd experienced their own medical discrimination. They carried signs with names, Vanessa's name prominent among them, and demanded accountability in voices that refused to be dismissed as isolated incidents. Patricia Chen called an emergency press conference. She stood at a podium in the hospital's main lobby, flanked by lawyers, her face carefully composed into an expression of professional concern. Metropolitan General Hospital takes these allegations very seriously. We have initiated a comprehensive review of our triage procedures and will cooperate fully with any investigations. However, I want to be clear. Our staff follows evidence-based protocols developed by leading medical organizations. Any suggestion of systematic discrimination is both unfounded and damaging to the dedicated healthcare professionals who serve this community. A reporter interrupted. Ms. Chen, Willie Morris documented 47 cases over 5 years, where patients of color experienced significantly longer wait times than white patients with similar complaints. How do you explain that pattern? I can't speak to individual cases without violating patient privacy. What I can say is that emergency departments nationwide face challenges with resource allocation, overcrowding, and complex medical decision-making. Our staff makes difficult triage decisions every day, based on medical acuity, not demographics. Then why did Marcus Johnson wait 53 minutes with a stab wound, while others with minor injuries were treated immediately? Patricia's composure cracked slightly. That specific case is under review. I can't comment on ongoing investigations. Is Sandra Williams still employed here? Personnel matters are confidential. She is, isn't she? The nurse who ignored a man bleeding in your waiting room still works here, while Willie Morris, who documented systemic failures and saved a man's life, has been suspended pending an investigation into unauthorized recording of patient information. That's what you're investigating? Not the discrimination, but the person who exposed it? The press conference dissolved into chaos, reporters shouting questions, Patricia retreating behind her lawyers, the hospital's carefully constructed narrative collapsing under the weight of obvious absurdity. You couldn't investigate the whistleblower while defending the system he'd exposed without revealing exactly what your priorities were. By evening, federal agencies had announced investigations. The Department of Health and Human Services, the Office of Civil Rights, the State Medical Board, all descending on Metropolitan General with subpoenas, document requests, and the full weight of regulatory authority that had been dormant for decades. Ruth's follow-up broadcast revealed something more disturbing. Metropolitan General wasn't an outlier. Her research team had found similar patterns at hospitals across the country. Longer wait times, higher mortality rates, worse outcomes for patients of color, even when controlling for insurance status, income, and presenting complaint. The discrimination wasn't individual cruelty. It was systemic design. But the most explosive revelation came from documents leaked by an anonymous source inside the hospital's billing department. Patricia had claimed triage decisions were based purely on medical acuity. The documents told a different story. Metropolitan General used an algorithm provided by their insurance processing partner, a company called Medimetrics, that calculated reimbursement efficiency scores for incoming patients based on insurance type, coverage limits, and demographic data, including zip code. The algorithm didn't explicitly use race. It didn't need to. Zip codes served as precise proxies, generating scores that predicted payment likelihood with enough accuracy to guide resource allocation without ever mentioning the protected characteristics that drove those predictions. The result was a healthcare system that provided faster, better care to patients more likely to generate higher reimbursements, all wrapped in the language of efficiency, optimization, and data-driven decision-making. Ruth's camera captured the moment she confronted the CEO of Medimetrics, a man named Frederick Shaw, outside his suburban office. "Mr. Shaw, your algorithm assigns patients reimbursement efficiency scores based on demographics. Isn't that just coded discrimination?" Frederick's smile was practiced, untroubled. "Our algorithm uses publicly available data to help hospitals optimize resource allocation. Healthcare is a business. Hospitals can't survive if they don't manage resources effectively. Even if that means people die waiting for care, that's an oversimplification of complex medical decision-making. Our tool is one input among many that clinicians consider. Except your contract with Metropolitan General includes performance bonuses tied to those scores. You financially incentivize hospitals to prioritize patients with higher reimbursement efficiency. You've monetized discrimination and called it healthcare management." Frederick's smile vanished. "This interview is over, but the damage was done. The invisible architecture of healthcare apartheid was becoming visible, not as individual prejudice, but as algorithmic discrimination, as systemic design that achieved discriminatory outcomes without requiring anyone to consciously hold racist beliefs. The cruelty was in the code, in the equations that calculated human worth in dollars and cents." 3 days after the surgery, Marcus woke up. His first words, whispered around the breathing tube, were, "Did I die?" Dr. Rivera, checking his vitals, smiled. "No, You survived. Against considerable odds, you survived. Willie? The janitor who called for help? He's been here every day. Would you like to see him? Marcus nodded. And minutes later, Willie entered, his eyes red from sleepless nights and tears he'd finally let fall. Thank you, Marcus said, his voice weak but clear. Thank you for seeing me. Willie took his hand. I should have seen you sooner. I should have seen all of them sooner. Vanessa, the 47 others, you. I should have spoken up years ago. You spoke up when it mattered. You saved my life, and others. Because of what happened to you, because Ruth got it on camera, things are changing. Federal investigations, lawsuits, policy reviews. Medimetrics' stock dropped 40%. Hospitals across the country are being forced to audit their triage procedures. It's not justice yet, but it's something. Marcus closed his eyes, exhaustion pulling him back toward sleep. Vanessa would be proud of you. After Marcus drifted off, Willie stood at the window, looking out at the protesters still gathered below. He'd lost his job. Officially, he'd been terminated for violating patient privacy and creating a hostile work environment. The termination letter made no mention of the lives he'd documented, the discrimination he'd exposed, the man he'd saved. Ruth joined him at the window. The ACLU wants to represent you. They're filing a wrongful termination lawsuit. I don't want my job back. Not here. Not in a place that chose profit over people for so long. Then what do you want? Willie thought of Vanessa, of the teacher she'd wanted to become, of the children she'd wanted to help feel seen and valued. I want to make sure her name means something. I want the 47 names in my notebook to be the last names on that list. I want a system where someone's address doesn't determine whether they live or die. That's a long fight, Willie. It might take years, decades. You might not live to see it finished. Willie smiled, tired but resolved. Vanessa didn't live to see her 24th birthday. The least I can do is fight for a world where others do, even if I never see that world myself. Below, the protesters chanted names: Vanessa Morris, Harold Freeman, Michelle Washington, Carlos Rodriguez, Marcus Johnson. A litany of the almost forgotten, the made invisible, the people whose emergencies had been deemed less urgent until someone finally refused to look away. The sun set over Metropolitan General in shades of orange and purple, beautiful and indifferent. Inside, Marcus's heart beat its irregular rhythm, each pulse a small act of defiance. Outside, the protesters raised their voices louder, refusing to disperse until someone in power acknowledged what everyone else could finally see: that the invisible wall Marcus had encountered wasn't personal hatred, but systemic design, and that walls built by human choices could be demolished by human action. Patricia Chen resigned 3 weeks later. Sandra Williams was fired. Dr. Rivera was named interim chief of emergency medicine and immediately implemented new protocols that removed demographic data from initial triage. Decisions: Medimetrics faced federal charges. Their algorithm was banned in 12 states within 6 months. Willie became a national advocate, traveling to speak at medical schools, hospitals, and legislative hearings. His notebook, carefully preserved, each page photographed and authenticated, became Exhibit A in 17 separate lawsuits. Marcus recovered slowly, painfully. He returned to work at the grocery store, but something had changed. He testified before Congress, his scar visible beneath his shirt, his voice steady as he described waiting 53 minutes to be seen, watching others treated while he bled. The most terrifying part, he told the assembled senators, wasn't the pain. It was the realization that I'd become invisible, that some algorithm, some equation, some unspoken protocol had calculated my life and found it less valuable than others. That's not an emergency room failure. That's a system working exactly as designed. The system didn't change overnight. Systems never do. But cracks appeared. In algorithms, in protocols, In the confident assertion that discrimination required conscious intent, the invisible began to become visible, and visibility was the first step toward accountability. 6 months later, Willie visited Vanessa's grave. He brought flowers and a copy of Ruth's Pulitzer Prize-winning investigation. "I finally did something, baby girl," he whispered to the headstone. "I finally found the courage you always had. I'm sorry it took so long." The wind moved through the cemetery, rustling leaves, carrying away words that didn't need to be spoken aloud. Somewhere, in an emergency room in a different city, another person walked through doors seeking help. The question, the eternal question, remained. Would they be seen? Would their emergency be deemed urgent enough? Or would they become another name in another notebook, another data point in a system that calculated human worth in reimbursement efficiency scores? The fight continued, would always continue, because making the invisible visible was not a single act, but a persistent choice. Renewed daily, hourly, in every moment when someone decided whether to look away or bear witness. Willie chose witness. So did Ruth. So did Dr. Rivera and Doris, and the thousands of people who shared their stories after Marcus's near death became a catalyst for conversation. And Marcus. He survived, carried his scar, and told his story to anyone who would listen. His life became testimony that some walls only exist because we agree not to see them, and that the moment we choose to look, to document, to refuse complicity, those walls begin to crumble. One person, one story, one moment of visibility at a time.